It has been interesting to see how they posited kind of different way of dealing with
a bit scared about having my words translated on the screen, so please rule out the ums and the ers whoever's doing the transcription.
My word translated on the screen.
So I'm just going to say a few words to give a few bits of kind of perspective on the topic at hand, to bring us back maybe to a bit to the abstract. I think there's also going to be an opportunity at the end for questions from the floor, and also obviously if people are texted in, I'll get bits of paper fed towards me to translate those questions. But firstly, yesterday I came down to meet the kind of students, and there was kind of a slight question as to whether there would be a purpose behind the students describing how they come about this kind of format. Did they need to kind of explicate their reasoning behind perhaps inviting a group of practitioners from a broader kind of spectrum than just straightforward curating to present their work, their practices in a more fluid way, a more performative way perhaps. And there's definitely something interesting there about what their brief was and why they decided on that brief. But I think it's also kind of feeds back into this idea of mediation as production. And really feeds back into this idea of an interest in a position that sits between artist and curator, and whether what role is, what necessity there is really to define those roles. Now, I think I just wanted to really consider that kind of position, that perhaps is one of in-betweenness, and consider how maybe what we just experienced over the last hour elicits some kind of sense of elasticity, that what we're being asked to do in this last hour is to slightly forget the need to qualify whether we're experiencing some kind of presentation of artwork, some form of documentation, some form of performance, some form of curatorial position or method. Before opening that up to discuss that with participants here, I just wanted to relate that kind of sense of in-betweenness to a text that I found quite helpful and that's opened up a few ideas for me recently. And that's a text by a sociologist called John Law. It's titled After Method, Mess in Social Science Research. It's very much kind of focusing on social science as a discipline, if you like, but looking beyond that, and in a kind of crude sense of what this very dense text is. What's kind of interesting to take away from this text is he develops this idea that every time, it's kind of a very simple idea in a way, but every time we look at reality, just by the process of looking and considering things, we're actually constructing those realities. That they're not automatically there, that we're actually producing them through our consideration of them. So he takes the very interesting kind of example of the laboratory situation, whereby scientists may use with great confidence a certain piece of apparatus to enable them to run certain tests. But obviously the sense of that piece of apparatus is that it's also built around a series of assumptions, a series of points of kind of coagulation, if you like, of ideas over a period of time. So his idea is to kind of flip it on its head slightly and to kind of ask at what point those realities are being formed through the processes we undertake. And I think it's interesting when looking at practice in a more diverse sense, in a more kind of open disciplinary sense, that those supposed certainties that we operate under, that we operate through, are kind of established methods of practice, whether they be curatorial methods or artistic methods, should somehow be considered as unstable, rather than some kind of fixed points from which we can distantly observe the world and what's going on around us. I think this is a very useful kind of thing in relation to the idea, in relation to this notion mediation as a practice of and a need
in relation to idea in relation to this notion
artist and
of
curator,
mediation as practice
and
and
to
beneath
even
the
blur
kind
positions
of
beyond
blur
those
position
focused
between
towards
artist
other
and
disciplines.
curator and to even blur positions beyond
In the
those
words of John
disciplines
Law,
of
there's a
other
challenge
disciplines.
perhaps that
In
we
the
will need
words of
to
John Law,
think hard
there
about
is
our
a challenge,
relations with whatever it is
perhaps,
we know,
that we will
and
need
ask
to
how
think
far the
hard
process of
about our
knowing it
relations
also
with
brings it into
whatever it
being.
is we know, and
So
ask how far
this
the
notion
process of knowing it also
is
brings
suggestive
it into being.
of assuming
So this notion
some
is
kind
suggestive of assuming
idea
some kind of
fixed
idea of
position,
UN fixed
of
position,
being
of
continually
being continually
reconstituted by the
reconstituted by the
input
input
of
of
other
other
people,
people,
perhaps,
by
by
kind of
unstable practical
practical conditions of
all
all
the
the kind
kind
of
of relations
relations that go into what production
is.
and therefore there is potential
And
there,
therefore there is
perhaps to
potential there
avoid
perhaps
closure
to
that
avoid
might be associated with
closure
one
that might be
singular position,
associated with
one singular view
position,
on the
one
world.
view on the
So
world.
that kind of one way,
So
perhaps
that's kind of like
open
the
up
one
into
way
this
perhaps
discussion a little
to
bit
open
more,
up into this
but I
discussion
think maybe what
a
it
little bit
returns
more.
to
But
was a time of
I
perhaps
think
its
maybe what it
origin of
returns
these
to,
ideas is
what we kind
slightly
of perhaps is
when
the
it
origin
comes down to these
of
two binaries or these
these
two
ideas is
positions of
slightly
artist and
when it comes down
curator.
to these
So
two
the kind of
binaries or these
sense
two
of
positions
immediateness
of
that we
artist
can
and
suggest
curator
that the role of
is
artist and curator doesn't
does
offer enough
a kind of
scope
sense of
that in the
immediative
fixedness of
position
those positions we're
suggest that the
lacking
role of
something.
artist and
I
curator
think
doesn't
I am
offer
going
enough
to
scope,
open
but
that
in the
up to the
fixedness of
floor
those
to
positions
the panelists
we're
here
lacking
to
something.
see whether anybody has
So
any
I
kind
think
of
I'm going to
instant
open that up to the
reactions
floor to
today.
the panelists here to
Maybe
see whether
Daniela
anybody has
and Alicia,
kind of
could you
instant
start?
reactions to that. Maybe Daniela and Lucia, could you, sorry to put this straight in on you, but I kind of
Describes the
pick up on
fact
something that
of
you
sound
said in your
threshold
presentation.
developing as a
You
practice,
described
in
the
some
fact
way
that
being
sound
to
threshold
necessity,
as a practice
through some kind of
as,
need to redress how sound is curated,
in some way
how
being
sound
through
is
necessity,
presented.
through some kind of need to
It was
readdress
not
how
just that.
sound
It was a need
created,
to address a
sound is
specific
presented.
landscape where we both found ourselves producing
It
the
was not
work
just that.
because it was
It
going
was
to
a
take
need
place
to
there.
address a
And there were
specific
a number
landscape
of issues
where we
raised by
both
the
found
fact
ourselves
that there were going to
producing
be
work
art projects
because
made by
the
people
festival
who
was
were
going to
not
take
that
place
familiar
there.
with the
There were a number of
landscape,
issues that
and
were
our
raised by the
position
fact
was
that there were
instead
going
of
to be
going to museums,
art projects
you know,
made by
to
people who were
engage
not
with
that familiar
museums
with the
and art,
landscape. And our
we
position
decided
was
to look
instead
at the
of going
landscape
to
by means of
museums,
an ecology and
to
go and
engage
engage in
with
dialogue with the
museums
center
and
of
art
people
vendors.
who have been
We decided
studying
to
that
look at the
territory
landscape
for
by
over
means
10
of
years.
ecology
I
and go
believe.
and engage in
I
dialogue
can't
with
remember when it was
the
funded.
center of alpine ecology people who've been studying that territory for over 10 years, I believe. I can't remember when it was funded. But,
well, the interesting thing that we saw that the center was like a
We
very
saw
small
that this
center,
center was like a very small center, so we find out it was a very incredible, a really community of 20 people. Like I said, the
And
first
maybe I
panel's
connect this
idea
with
of
the first
working between autonomy
idea of
and
working
engagement in the
between
community is like what this
autonomy and
community.
engagement. Not
What is
necessarily
a
in the
community?
community, it's
It's a
like
subject.
big
It's a
community. What is a
question.
community? It's
So
a
you two
subject,
in this
it's a
project,
question.
you will
So
engage
I
with
do
the
feel that
people
this
that do
project
the
will be
research by
engaged
the
with people that
environment,
do the
and it was
research
the
by
kind of
environment.
style
And it
between
was a
the
kind of
artist
dialogue
and the
between the artist,
musicians
the
and the
musicians,
scientists.
us, and the
So
scientists.
this kind of idea now
So this
research
kind of
was in play.
cross-disciplinary
But
research
yet,
it was
in
in place.
relation to the manifesto, there
But
was
yet, yes,
also
in relation to
discussion of the
manifesto,
topography
there was
of the
also an
area.
idea to address
Many
the
claimed
topography
that
of
it was
Trentino,
about
because
the
many
ecology,
claim manifesto
about
believed that
there was no
manifesto
real
was
engagement
about
with this
ecology.
specific
But,
topic.
there was no
So
real
with
real
that,
engagement with
this
that
kind of
specific
need to
topic.
shift beyond the conditions that
So,
were
in a
set up
sense,
by manifesto and
that
create
kind of need
different
to
kinds
shift
of
beyond the
relationships
conditions that
was,
were
I
set up by
suppose,
manifesto and
it's
create
about moving beyond the
different kind of
constraints of that kind of
relationships.
situation,
Was,
but also
I
positing
suppose
a
it's about
different
moving
kind of
beyond the
mode of
constraints of
research,
that
and
kind
the
of
one
situation,
that
but
was
also
entrenched in
positing
what
a different
manifesto
kind of
is
research
and how
than
it
the one
works.
that was entrenched
Yet,
in what manifesto
there was
is.
fluidity brought about by the decision of using sound and the fact that should allow us to play in a concert and format and not just in a display, that I think is a point I think the interest for our interest with sound is really focusing on the idea of listening, which is another way in which you relate with the audience. So sound, the element of time and space, and the question for us is actually a thing of space. It was not as much about curating sound. It's coming up now. It's quite interesting people invited us as a sound curator. What a sound curator is, I don't know. It's more about the listening. But perhaps that's kind of interesting. Again, in a sense, that sound curator being a slightly unstable term because we don't really know what it is yet offers potential. Perhaps that isn't the notion of curating within the field of sound has a new and kind that is unreversed. If you like, it's something that needs to be formulated as it's happening, rather than already being in place. It's not that kind of coagulation, as I said earlier, of ways of doing things. Well, again, it's interesting because it's an in-between territory.
Well, again, it's interesting because it's an in-between territory. When you have, an in-between territory, then it's where experimentation can happen.
So it's more like a fixation with sound. It's a sound, but only because it's in between territory. A sound artist might want to say something about it. Yes, I was just about to ask in terms of the piece you presented. There's a really interesting correlation between the center of the experience of sound and its relationship between quite particular concerns around organizing kinds of self-organized initiatives to do with artists and curators working together. Sure, I mean, I just backpedal a bit about where the text comes from originally, which is from the book of artists that work with our group, the host artist group. I set up a proposal up there about questioning what the whole organization is and how artists felt, having been engaged with that, and they wrote in this text, which, was gradually evolving into a text that was actually more about the animal kingdom and the analogy there about artists and how they thought they were being approached specifically. When one approached the piece, today it came out of this hybrid of what we have been asked to do, even between trades. It came from the text, which we interrupted, intervened with, and transferred that into something else. I think it's slightly vague in between areas is what we have presented today. Listening as well, we saw was very key, so we wanted to highlight little moments from the text, highlight little areas, because we thought that in the context of a real day, it's hard to remember everything. We wanted to tell that differently. Of course, we weren't on stage from that. We were independent from it to try to heighten the idea of listening. Also, if you didn't want to be able to lead. I mean, what they took away from also those snippets of text and spoken word is within how, within the way that the host artist group works, that there's a symbiotic relationship between the host and the artist. In one sense, this notion of a parasite, perhaps someone who is kind of feeding off the host, rather than being separated out, and I think that's a really interesting position that you can have. That sense of collaboration isn't always so clearly defined as a positive process. It's also a troubling process that enables other kind of positions. Yeah. Familiar with how artists groups function and how those collaborations actually come about in our enacted and made public, if you like. Yeah, I mean, they're nearly always selected and right artists that come to produce a piece of work responding to a brief, and the work that, the risk element, I guess with it is, one of the things we have our kind of bankers, as I said, we expect a good piece of work from some people.